In the interview you just witnessed, Hare confessed that Leon David, Wilbur McKinley, and William Bradley were the ones involved. Let's take a look at the largest used encyclopedia on the planet.
Referencing back to the Wikipedia Malcolm X page, just to show you the effect of disinformation, which is a technique used by our government and the CIA intelligence agencies. It's also, all this stuff is also in our textbooks, and we're probably all taught it in university and in school and stuff like that about history, and it's all false. But in any event, we're going to go to the assassination part again. And here we have Thalmadge Hare, a Nation of Islam member, also known as Thomas Hagen, was arrested on the scene. Eyewitnesses identified two more suspects, Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson, also members of the Nation. All three were charged in the case. At first, Hare denied involvement, but during the trial he confessed to having fired shots at Malcolm. He testified that Butler and Johnson were not present and were not involved in the assassination, but he declined to name the men who did join him in the shooting. All three men were still convicted. So that means that two of these men were put in prison for a very long time and lost their entire lives sitting in prison for a crime they didn't commit. Now here we go. Butler, now known as Muhammad Abdul Aziz, was paroled in 1985. He became the head of the Nation of Islam's Harlem Mosque in New York in 1998. He continues to maintain his innocence. Johnson, now known as Khalil Islam, was released from prison in 1987. During his time in prison, he rejected the teachings of the Nation of Islam and converted to Sunni Islam. He too maintains his innocence. Hare, now known as Mujahid Halim, was paroled in 2010, just last year.
Granted his parole. He's supposed to walk away from the New York State prison system on April 28th. Now, there's something called victims' impact statements that are supposed to take place. Malcolm was not only a world figure, he came from a large family on both sides. We got a call just a few minutes ago from the parole board in response to our letter to the governor of the state of New York, Governor Patterson, and he said, we didn't know where any of the family was. And we find that absolutely incredible. The Little family is well known on Malcolm's father's side. His nephew Ronell is also a published author and with us almost every year when we do the annual pilgrimage to the gravesite. So we do not accept their excuse for not allowing those victims' impact statements to be heard. But there are other questions that need to be asked. Thalmadge Hare did confess to what he did. We acknowledge that. It is a detailed confession where he names everybody who worked with him and who fired and took Malcolm's life away on February 21st. He did that out of personal guilt and to clear the other two men who were wrongly convicted and who were never released until they did their own time. The state of New York, the federal government of the United States, did not act on Hare's confession. That is a major question for us. Why? And we believe that the short answer is that if you climb up that apple tree, you're going to find a rotten hand of the United States government in complicit with someone having pulled those triggers and making sure that that happened and that those men all got away scot-free. And finally, we have to ask some other questions too. There's dozens.
69-year-old Thomas Hagen, convicted of the 1965 assassination of Malcolm X, was paroled yesterday after serving 45 years of a 20-year-to-life sentence. But the question here is not whether a man convicted of murder can change and should be allowed to one day walk free. The point that we have to mention here is that when he actually walked out of the prison and into freedom, it was under the shadow of a sign naming a street in honor of the man that he once killed. It was Malcolm X Boulevard. So here we have to question how this man's legacy still lives on today. Joining us from our New York studio to discuss it, I have RT correspondent Marina Portnaya. Marina, first of all, tell me, were there any people out on the streets today perhaps that were angry or protesting because of this man's release? Alona, well, nothing that we know of so far. As a matter of fact, if you turned on some of the local channels here in New York City, they were showing a full-screen picture of Thomas Hagen. There was no video of any protests or demonstrations taking place when he finally walked out to what we can call freedom. But many Malcolm X supporters and organizations did speak out condemning his release, saying that he should not have been paroled. And we have to mention, though, for the past 22 years, he was on a partial work release program where he was working during the week and spending 2 nights in prison.
What? Okay, that's just crazy. This sort of reminds me of something like diplomatic immunity. Check out this card. If you have this card, you can't get charged no matter what you do. And check out where you have to return the card if you find it. To the Office of Foreign Missions in Washington, D.C. I wonder how you get one of these. Probably got to be some sort of special agent or something.
Some of Malcolm X's speeches, some of what he said still carries through today. First of all, I want to play us a clip from one of his speeches.
This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail. But if you can't prove that a democracy is not hypocrisy, then don't put your hands on me.
Now, Marina, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't those sound like the same echoes that we're hearing from the Tea Party and from all these polls that are showing how much distrust there is for the government right now in America? Well, actually, to be technical, that is the exact quote I heard from Ralph Nader during the 2008 presidential elections. And yes, we do hear a lot of these complaints that democracy is hypocrisy.
Today we welcome Khalil Islam. 30 years ago, Mr. Islam was known as Thomas 15X Johnson. Mr. Johnson was one of 3 men convicted of the assassination of Malcolm X, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Mr. Islam was paroled after serving 22 years for the murder. He has steadfastly maintained his innocence. Who killed Malcolm X?
I think that's the question that none of us can actually answer. That is precisely the reason that this past Tuesday, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is calling for a class action suit. The answer to that question is hidden in secret government files. And this American people, these black people who have been deprived of leadership for so many decades, we demand that the light of truth be shown on the secrets that are hidden in government files so that we can answer that question once and for all: who killed Malcolm X, who killed Martin Luther King, and even who killed John F. Kennedy.
Or Robert Kennedy, for that matter. George?
There are some things we can say, though. And we can say that the FBI conducted extensive spying on the Nation of Islam, on Malcolm X, telephone conversation, infiltrating each organization at its highest level. We can say that. We can also say Gene Roberts, the person who's pitching that famous picture, giving Malcolm X the mouth resuscitation, was an undercover New York City cop. Not only that, he told us, and we reported this in the American magazine, that a week before he saw a dry run, the assassination of Malcolm X, that he reported that to the New York City Police Department. They said they would pass it on. They did nothing, and when assassination went down, it went down exactly the way he saw it.
There seems to be a suggestion, gentlemen, just listening that is, that the FBI may have been involved in the assassination. Was there a climate that the FBI fostered so that the assassination could take place?
They bragged about it. The Chicago office bragged about it.
Are you suggesting that because of his international attachments, because of where he was going in terms of his leadership internationally,
correct,
that he became even a bigger threat to the FBI?
That's correct, because you see, Nasser and others would have helped him at the UN bring up the problem of African Americans in America. So he was moving in a direction that was making the national government here very uncomfortable.
Another thing we can say in terms of moving closer to the horn and also taking advantage of the fact that we have one of the men who served 22 years after being convicted, and that is that we can also say that there were 3 gunmen, and there were 3 guns. There was a shotgun, there was a 9mm, and there was a .45. Thomas Hare, who went to trial, essentially said that the other 2 men were not involved. Khalil Islam, who we have here, is one of those men whom he said during the trial was not, in fact, involved. So the question is, and I think at least the journalistic community that is interested, which is a very narrow community, or the reading public that is interested, which is also narrow, have come to the assumption that 2 of the 3 people on the trigger were not, in fact, in the ballroom that day. And so the question is, well, who were on the triggers?
Who do you think, Les? Who do you think was the mastermind behind the killing of Malcolm X?
Well, there's 2 questions. I mean, if you're talking about the mastermind or the person on the trigger. In other words, we have 2 triggers that are presently unoccupied.
Give me an answer to both, my friend.
Well, I think as a journalist, I need to know who's on the trigger before I can know who was his mastermind.
Khalil, we're talking all around you. We don't want to do that.
I'm listening. What he's saying is true when it comes to the 4 individuals. The affidavit was put in by William Kunstler in my behalf. As close as I've gotten to that was we had a brother named Imam Faiz, and he went to New Jersey to investigate, and he found out that these people indeed existed, and their whole history was just like Mujahid ran it down to us.
All right, let's clear this up for our audience. Were you involved in the assassination of Malcolm X?
No, I wasn't.
How did you get shot?
I didn't get shot.
You did not get shot?
No, ma'am.
Were you involved around it, over it, under it? Then how did you get arrested?
I couldn't even walk. I was involved in an incident in the Bronx where a correction officer was shot named Benjamin Brown. And when that happened, one of Malcolm's close associates, and I want everybody to listen to this very carefully because it came out just exactly like I'm telling you. This is a coincidence. He got on TV and he said, you see what Thomas 15X did and Norman Butler? He said, those guys, man, he says, they're going to get all of us hypocrites. They're going to get me, they're going to get Malcolm, and it happened just like that.
So you were set up to take the fall, you think?
Behind that incident in the Bronx. And what the man said on national TV, and by the way, Malcolm was assassinated, I was in the tombs, and I was told through one of the correctional officers, you got a problem. I said, what kind of problem I got? He said, they found Leon dead in Boston. I said, he said, you know what he said in Newsweek? I said, yeah.
Tell us remind the audience who Leon was.
Well, Leon Amir was the karate instructor for the FOI. And that's why it led, they believed that he was telling the truth. And he said that, all right, so the DA said I found later on, so what these guys think they're a black mafia, so we're going to make sure that they don't never see daylight anymore.
Khalil, who do you think killed Malcolm?
Well, I would say that the individual that was shot on the scene, Mujahid, he told me himself that the 4 individuals that he gave up, he says we went there and we rehearsed it, just like somebody just said. We rehearsed it, and we came back the next week and we carried out the operation. He said he was very sorry that he destroyed my family and my business and whatnot, and this is the reason why he confided in me. For some reason, he just felt my spirit and we just locked together. And he ran the whole thing down to him. I said, well, listen, you should have never took the stand. You're not going to give up names. The DA is not going to let anybody go. You have to give up names.
So you felt that the moment you were arrested that there was no hope for you to get justice?
None whatsoever. I even stated that before when I was on trial. I told my co-defendant, I said, listen, I said, we're going to take a long trip. The only way we're going to get out is through the back door. It was sealed. I knew it was sealed. I had a lot of experience with, street life and prison and stuff like that.
Let's take a break. And when we...
The matter is obviously one of great political sensitivity, both internationally and domestically. The department considered the matter one of sufficient importance to discuss with President Johnson, who, in turn, asked Mr. Hoover to secure any further information.
There were many things that Malcolm was doing that were deemed subversive, that was deemed threatening to the United States government, to the Johnson administration, to Hoover's mentality and the mentality of members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as CIA.
And here was Brother Malcolm traveling around through Africa, equating, and in essence, saying that the United States was in no position to be talking, telling the rest of the world, giving the rest of the world lectures because of the things that were going on in this country.
Our desire, our prayer, that we can have a peaceful, intelligent rally here this afternoon. But at the same time, we see that they have surrounded us with many of their own agents in uniform and out of uniform